Tony Howard, moneytrainer.co.nz. Welcome again, Money Tuesday. I get to share a money tip with you. You can use it, you can share it, or if it doesn't fit your circumstances, by all means, you can just let it go on by. Now, today's tip, I want to talk to you about how you can get your budget to work. I often hear people saying, look, budgets, they started out okay, but they tended to get 4 or 5 weeks, 2 months down the track, and then it just doesn't seem to work anymore. And there's several reasons for this, but I want to share with you today a tip that can help correct that if that's been an experience that you've had in the past and you're looking for a way to be able to budget and do so confidently. So the first thing I encourage people to do is to put aside a savings component. Now, if you look at the example on the screen here at the moment, there's nothing allocated to savings. There's just a surplus amount of $227. And so it's very easy to spend that without thinking. What I encourage people to do is put aside 10% of the balance of income once their debt commitments have been removed from their income. So in this instance here, we're talking about an income of 1052, we're talking about a mortgage payment of 455. If you take that and subtract that from the income, the amount that is left over, that's the amount that you should calculate 10% of, not 10% of your total income. This is a much easier amount to focus on savings, and it means that tucking that money aside, you start to build a resource. So when you're 3-4 weeks down the track and you have an article like clothing, for instance, which isn't on this list today, but now is on a list in 4 or 5 weeks' time, you have a resource of some money that you've tucked away that can just help absorb some of those expenses if your budget doesn't quite add up that week. Number 2 is when you're creating a budget, try and avoid doing it in this method here as a list. I encourage people to look at a budget in the view of 4 sections. Now, what we're doing here is we're defining a difference between living expenses, which are necessary for life to function, and lifestyle expenses, which are great to have and add a bit of fun into life. If you can separate between the two, it makes it easier at times when you have to make amendments to your budget or you have to just juggle things around to identify which ones you have a bit more control over changing and which ones they are what they are, and you're going to have to make sure they fit. It's a lot easier than a single list of all the expenses that you can think of. The other 2 areas that you have is what we call your debts. So they're your commitments like your mortgage or your rent payment and any personal loans, hire purchases, etc. And then you have your savings section. And this is where you would be putting aside that 10% that I talked about earlier and any other money that you're periodically putting aside for financial goals and other things you're aiming for. So there you go. There's my tip. To get your budget working, always put aside 10% of what is left after your debt payments have been paid. And then when you're creating a budget, instead of a list, separate your expenses into these 4 key areas that I've talked about, and it'll make it easier to prioritize where your money goes. Remember, any other helpful tips or ideas, you can find them at moneytrainer.co.nz. And like always, if you can't find the answer for something you're looking for, you can schedule a free call. I'll have a chat and point you in the right direction.